You're all set.
Super. Thanks, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our MRC special board meeting. Thank you for joining us today. We have a short agenda, but we're expecting it to take the full hour. We've got a couple items we'll be considering. The first being the potential addition of a new class of members to MRC membership. And then we will also be discussing the first draft guidelines from DEP on the extended producer responsibility implementation. So, we'll start by approving the agenda. Does anybody have any changes or additions to the agenda to make? All right, seeing none, we'll jump right into our two items. And we don't have a formal public comment today scheduled, but if there's anybody out there in the public that would like to comment, actually, do we have? Yeah, we do have a Q&A. You can put a question in the Q&A and we'll see if we have time to address it. If we don't have time to address it during the meeting, we certainly we'll get back to you after the meeting. But we would like to try to keep this to an hour today. So with that, we'll start with our first business item, which is to discuss the new potential non-associate MRC membership item. And Mike, I'm hoping you will be able to sort of walk us through the concept, the broad brush outlines of what's happening and why we are considering a new class of members and generally the structure. And then we can get into the actual agreement itself and that language, and then the related changes to the bylaws that we need to make to accommodate that.
Okay, yes, no problem. I can go over that very high level, then answer any questions that the board might have. Can you hear me any better now?
You're still like bubbly, but we can understand you.
Okay. Real quick, Amy, I just sent you an email. Can you send Tony the link and get him in, please? And I sent you.
I am trying, but a webinar is a little different. It's not just sending him a link. I have to send him an invite. So I will do my best to do that right now.
Okay, thank you. Offering membership into the MRC is something that we had discussed. It's a new level of membership. It's what the draft currently is calling is an associate member. And a couple reasons for this is one is for the economics and the stability of the Hamden facility, but also with the unknown at PERC right now and the auction being delayed again, we are getting a lot of calls from non-members. So I've worked with our legal team and our consultants over the last 4 or 5 weeks to put something together. And what we tried to do is to make sure that our membership, our current membership, was protected for sticking in there with us and seeing this thing through, and that the same benefits would not necessarily be offered to a associate member. So what we're looking to do for the board to look at is offer an MRC associate membership. And high level, what that means is an associate member would not have any ownership, voting rights, entitled to any deltas, rebates, or profit sharing. That is for our membership. But what an associate member does benefit from is a significant discount in the tip and fee, which after I go over the benefits, I'll go over that structure. MRC representation in legislative and regulatory activities. MRC representation in contractual matters relating to supply agreements. Access to regional and corporate services that we are developing, such as tire shredding and those type of things as we develop them. Annual tracking and reporting of municipal solid waste and recycling data, which could be very important as this EPR bill rolls out. And community outreach and educational material that we are creating with the facility. So after working with our partner Innovative, the majority owner of the facility, what they've come up with for pricing is an associate member would be at $94 tipping rate, and then a $2 dues to the MRC per ton. So how that works is if they signed as an associate member, they are signing for the term up to 2034. That is when our term runs out with MWS, because it starts on January 1st of 2024. So on the term piece of it, we just put the end date. So the pricing structure for MWS is 5-year contracts and under are going to be $100 tipping rate for non-MRC associate members. 5 years and over is $98. If you want the $94 rate, you have to become an MRC non-associate member. That's the only way you're going to get below the $98 and you have to sign up for the long term.
So Mike, is that $94 a ton plus the $2 MRC dues? Okay, so
Yes.
it was 96 versus the 98.
Yes. Like I had mentioned, the term would be until January 1st of 2034. What we've done for protection in there is if the contract were to be breached, we would do 5 years of dues. So we'd go off of their last dues and we'd do 5 years of dues for a breach of contract. If somebody also starts mid-year, which will potentially happen, what we would do is we'd do an estimate on the dues and then we'd reconcile everything after they get a full years of waste in. What we had to do is, so along with that document, I mean, there's a lot of language that goes along with that, but along with that document, we sent in the change of some of the updates that would have to happen to the bylaws so that we could offer an associate membership. That's just pretty high level stuff that John took care of. But while we were in there making those changes, we also updated the bylaws and revised things for anything to do with now that the facility's under the new ownership or any of that construction stuff that was in there that just no longer applies to those. So it was a good chance to kind of clean everything up. That's very high level of what we've put together and what it looks like for benefits and term. I'm sure there's some questions on that. Does anybody have any questions I can answer for them on that?
Sophie?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Mike, is can you do a catch-all with something like and any other benefits as determined by the MRC Board of Directors? I just don't want to get into a position where people try to say, you know, we start something that's not in that list and they shouldn't have to pay for it because it's not in the list.
I see. Like over the stuff we develop over the 15 years, if it wasn't included. That's a good point.
Yes.
The one thing that's probably an important change I forgot to add was with the unknowns at PERC right now, we are getting a lot of phone calls. So one thing that we did is we made it so an officer could approve a new associate member, because where we only have our quarterly board meetings, I was just afraid that there's going to be a lot of activity in the beginning where I hate to back burner people in case they don't have home for their waste and wait in a time to wait for approval till the next board meeting if we don't have one for a couple of months because we're not near our quarterly meeting or any type of special board meeting. So that was something that we did add into this agreement. Just so we could make sure that we get back to people in a timely manner in case there is a big change.
But I thought that it required a vote of the board. So are you envisioning like a blanket authorization for certain board members to be able to sign these agreements?
So this is where I had Jonathan wordsmith it. So Jonathan, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think, one of the ideas was in the event it was helpful or needed to be, I'll call nimble in between quarterly board meetings. There's essentially two ways you could essentially have an authorization. One is something that we do fairly typical, which is, if we have all the material construct terms, conditions, etc., there'll be a board authorization for the officers, or at least one of the officers acting singly, to carry out that authorization. So one potential way of doing that is, okay, if you have the material terms and conditions, a substantive form of how an associate member could become an associate member of MRC, a board authorization to say, yes, we approve that, and therefore authorize one of the officers to sign that member up, in my view, would be, an appropriate method. Obviously, it would need to be within the four corners of that authorization. So that's something we've done before, in other types of transactions or items. There's always the possibility as well, if there couldn't wait till the next board meeting, you can do as an organization, the board, basically unanimous written consent vote. I don't think we've done that very often in the past. That's also an available method. So I think the idea was to try to be as consistent as possible, to have, for an associate member, all associate members would essentially have the same substantive construct. And if that's the case, it really comes down to, the names are different, obviously, with certain volumes, but the same basic construct is there. So at the end of the day, it's certainly up to the board how they would want to proceed on those types of authorization logistics. But just knowing that there's the ability to do that, the flexibility, I think, is helpful. Knowing that you can always call a board meeting to do an authorization, but it may be helpful to have an authorization if the whole construct is known and appropriate going forward. A lot of this is a timing consideration as well going forward.
Sophie?
So, not to undermine the authority of the board, but I feel like in adopting the construct of what the expectations are and what the terms of associate membership would be, I don't understand why our executive director can't simply sign people up. There doesn't seem to be any discretion here.
If I think Sophie froze up on my screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think I understood Sophie's question or comment. Certainly, the board, just as they could authorize an officer, they could authorize executive director or both. So, that's probably going to be a preference of I would envision kind of a specific board resolution that would capture all that. And you tell me what you'd like to have in there for flexibility.
Yeah, I think that would work. Mike, do you have
Just another quick note to add as I was going through my notes, sorry. So this is not a waste agreement. This is an agreement with the MRC as a non-associate member. The waste agreements will be through MWS. One requirement of being a non-associate member is you have to have, of course, your executed waste agreement with MWS. So we're not signing. So just so everybody's clear, is none of these volumes go to our volume that we currently have on our waste supply agreement with MWS. This is a totally different scenario. This is an agreement to be an MRC non-associate member. It's not a waste processing agreement with MWS.
Melissa?
So will the cost assigned at the $198 or $94, will that be in the waste supply agreements? For each joining associate, that's where those costs will be defined. And also in there will be the same language as what we have as members, like the costs that increase every year, that will be in there as well.
Yes, so I just want to clarify, it's an MRC non-associate is 94 plus the $2 dues.
Mhm.
A 5-year contract or less with MWS is $98. And a 5-year and over contract with MWS, if you don't want to be an MRC non-associate, is $100.
And those amounts will be in a waste agreement.
Those amounts will be in a waste agreement with the standard CPI setup like what we have now.
And then just one more question. Do we have any concerns about how much tonnage, extra tonnage we're taking?
We know what our tonnage is now. We know what the facility is permitted for, which is about an 80,000 ton difference. And we know what we think will become available. That's an estimate if something were to happen to PERC. So, I mean, it would be, so I guess with the knowledge of those things, it would definitely be a controlled growth.
Will the MRC associate members have priority at the facility over the MWS contracted waste? Like we have priority at the facility right now over any additional waste that MWS might find. Will the
Right.
associate members have that same benefit?
That's not in here, Karen, and that was not discussed. That did not come up. If that's something you'd like me to discuss, I can do that.
I would say yes.
Certainly one of the benefits of being MRC, it's sort of, I think of it as being part of a union, you know, we're sort of there collectively supporting all the people in our membership, varying types of membership. Bob?
I had a question regarding the access to rebates. Associate members won't have access to rebates. Does that mean that, assuming EPR goes forward, that they won't have access to monies from the EPR program as well? Or do we want to specifically include in that document regarding associate membership that they would have access to EPR funds if they're made available?
So I think the best thing on there is, I can note that, I think the best thing to do there is we can clarify that outside of the MRC ownership, as other programs develop, that can be determined. But as when it comes to the MRC ownership in the MWS, that's where I was talking about rebates. Instead of rebates, we'll just call it profit sharing. We own 10%, MRC owns 10% of MWS and is entitled, if it's profitable, to some of those profits. And that is more or less the point I was making. Programs outside of the MRC, we can look at those as those develop and what those are.
Okay, I just thought it would be helpful to clarify that in the document.
Yeah, and I think that's a distinct benefit that we could offer people as assistance in administering EPR. Tony, did you have a comment?
The last thing Bob said about having it clarified, I think sooner than later, and have it in there.
See, to me, and I could be wrong, that falls under the benefit of reporting. You know, you need the reporting from us to report back for your EPI, your EPR benefits and all of that. I don't know if that's going to come through us because that's so open. That's what we're going to discuss in a minute. Or if we're just providing the towns and municipality with their volume numbers and then they're applying for that type of rebate. But you're absolutely right. If we're doing the rebates, you're right, Bob. If we're doing the reporting so they can get their rebates, then they are covered under that.
Okay. Does EPR refer to those as rebates? It's reimbursement.
Reimbursement.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a brief comment. I know in drafts, and I know we can certainly provide more clarification. You know, when Mike's talked about rebates or distributions, we're specifically pegging that just for clarity purposes too, like the master waste supply agreement and the other kind of operative documents that would relate to, think of the existing MRC members and those rights under those documents. Just making clear that as a new associate member, the availability of rebates / distributions pursuant to ownership on the master supply agreement, that would not be part of an associate member benefit, as Mike had mentioned before. Again, in recognition of the sticking with MRC, going through this process for the existing members.
I don't know if anybody's brought this up before, Mike, but I sort of had a little concern over identifying the first benefit as a significantly discounted tipping fee. Is there a reason why we can't just say a discounted tipping fee? I'm just worried that somebody's going to get a beef and say, well, that's not significant to me. So, I mean, then they don't have to sign up, I guess, but still.
Right. I guess it's more of a long-term guarantee with a CPI. So yes, we can reword that.
I would just say strike the word significantly and just call it discounted tipping fee, because that's pretty much what they're getting.
Okay.
Bob.
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but getting back to the EPR and any distributions they make, I would think that setting that up as a benefit for associates would be helpful all around, especially as we engage other parties concerning this issue. I think there's strength in numbers. So if we pull the associates into our group and make it clear that we're doing the reporting, I think that gives us leverage.
Well, but I think we want to be careful about how we're wording it to make sure we're talking about providing assistance with materials going through the facility and not reaching too far beyond that, other than maybe perhaps a blanket assistance to members in general with EPR issues, and being a voice in that end. But I mean, we're not going to be going into people's transfer stations and doing their data collection or reporting on any of that stuff necessarily.
No, I understand what you're saying. Yep. Thank you.
Sophie?
I also think we want to be careful about getting too specific, because EPR is the thing of today, but these contracts go for a long period of time. And essentially, I think what Mike and Jonathan are trying to get us to see is that they get the benefits of being an MRC member without necessarily all of the authorities, and not getting profit sharing if the plant is profitable. I'd be really careful not to start tying in to specific state programs, because I personally think we're going to see more iterations of these programs with different words and setups.
And I have just kind of a nitpicky thing, which is, can we not call it the new associate member agreement and just call it an associate member agreement? Because after this year, it's not going to be new anymore. So, and we don't have current associate members, so there's no need to describe them as new, because everybody's going to be new.
We can do that.
Does anybody have any other comments on the associate member agreement? Sophie?
My last comment on this particular topic is that I'm really impressed with how our staff managed consultants and came up with, I think, a really nice compromise of holding MRC members that have gone in for the risk with the reward if it's still going to come. And at the same time, ensuring the best option for profitability long term. So very happy. It's not what everybody kind of may have felt like they wanted at the beginning, but I think they really listened to concerns.
I would agree with that. Bob?
I'm just curious to know whether we've tried this out sort of in general terms with any of the folks Mike's been discussing things with. If he has, what are the receptions like?
So what I'm trying to do is prepare for the MMA, which is next week, because I think that's where I'm really going to be asked questions. There's the one transfer station that approached us a while back ago. That's why I've been working on the document, and they like you said, what I get a lot back, especially with all this stuff happening with like EPR and the hierarchy, they believe strength is in numbers, and they're happy to know that somebody's watching over this stuff on the Hill and watching what's going on in the legislative. So that was their big feedback. It's a little bit more detailed than this, but I call it the AAA membership. You become a member, and then you get all the benefits of being a member for that outside of that scope. So it's been good, but my real big test is going to be next week at the MMA, and that's why I really wanted to have this meeting before that.
So a question for the folks, if people, like, I can envision communities may be reluctant to consider the long term. I don't know, maybe they think something's going to happen in the next 5 years and want to go for the less than 5 years. So we're not offering membership to anybody else other than folks that are willing to sign up for the long term.
No, that's what I did, because that's what our current members are in now for, is the long term.
All right, the bylaws pretty much had some adjustments to accommodate this new class of members. Seem pretty straightforward to me. Does anybody have any comments or questions about them? I had one question, John, on the disqualified individuals, talking about who is not able to serve on the board. And we specifically identify MWS. Do we want to identify Innovative or their affiliates or something like that? I don't know. Not that they're going to reach out and put anybody from around here on their board, but you never know. I don't know.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, that harkens back to kind of a name change in the bylaws, where it used to say coastal, where, if there's any person or entity controlled by them, Fibrite or coastal, they couldn't also be on the board of MRC. And I'm just checking now, that also says, any person or entity providing financing to municipal waste solutions would similarly be disqualified.
Oh, so okay, so that incorporates Innovative then? That language that's in it now?
I would say yes.
Okay. Sounds good.
And
all right.
And if just a brief comment just on timing and procedure, and it's up to the board, of course, but my suggestion is, my understanding was the purpose of this meeting was to have a discussion, if you will, on what the parameters would look like for an associate member. Corresponding with that would be proposed changes to the bylaws, which I would also say too would include, probably a corresponding change to articles of incorporation, just to make sure it's clear there's another class of members. But what I was anticipating was, I know we have a meeting upcoming, I think it's October, I should know the precise day, October 11th. 11th, thank you. If the board felt comfortable with these kind of, I'll call it the initial parameters as drafted, that could be a meeting where if the board wanted to, they could consider, implementing some of the bylaw amendments, understanding that what's behind that is the construct of an associate member agreement. And obviously there's going to be more information coming forward, but that would kind of establish, I'll call it a pathway, such that if a municipality or a quasi municipal organization or entity was interested, they would have a more clear picture of how they could become, I'm going to say new member, but I'll say an associate member of MRC. So that was just a comment or suggestion of, in terms of official action, maybe October 11th might be something to consider for the board as opposed to right now, for example.
I think that makes sense. Do you feel comfortable with that, Mike?
Yeah, so my hopes were that we would, that's why I wanted to have this out early to you. We would make the revisions that the board has requested. We will circulate a new document. And then the board could approve things at the time of the meeting. But I'm looking for the board's permission that at the MMA, I can discuss associate member, and that the board currently has under review an agreement that we hope to have out in the next few weeks.
I think that sounds like a good plan. Like we've got concurrence. All right, we ready to move on to the next topic on the agenda? So we have before us the whatever they called it, the initial conceptual draft for part 1 of extended producer responsibility. The Department of Environmental Protection has been holding a series of very long and arduous meetings about EPR and the legislation that was adopted, I don't know, was last year or something like that, to figure out how to implement this legislation. And I guess this is the first product of those meetings, and it's only part 1, so it only covers a portion of the total entirety of what EPR is about. And I don't know if there's anybody out there who wants to try to explain the general idea of what EPR is supposed to do, but I mean, I think what's happening is that there's going to be a list of things that are considered recyclable items, and communities need to sign up and agree to participate to recycle all those items. And if they do, then their cost to manage those items, or some of the costs, will get reimbursed back to them from the state, because the state is going to assess a fee on producers for making bad packaging, something like that. And so that fee is what's going to fund the program. And it's insanely complicated, and they've been wrestling it for months now. And this is their first sort of product that they've put out there, and they've asked for comments back by October 13th. So we have our waste flow committee that has been sort of tasked with keeping an eye on EPR and trying to keep up with it and be part of the conversation, because the legislation was developed and really scoped, I think, by Southern Maine communities very much with the mindset that, folks are separating the recycling, even if it's single stream, and that we want to make sure that any EPR program is able to be applicable to MRC members, and that the facility's method of recycling is counted as recycling. And this is a very big issue, because this EPR is, I believe, only going to grow in its scope. I think right now the list of things considered recyclable, actually, they don't even have a list yet of what's considered recyclable, but it's going to be very short. I think it's going to be very short list, like corrugated cardboard and, a handful of items at the beginning, but I imagine over time they envision it growing. I imagine it's going to be some real money that's going to be going back to communities to help support recycling programs. And we want to make sure that our members are able to benefit from that as much as any other members in this, or any other communities in the state that are attempting to recycle and divert their items from landfills. So our goal today is to kind of discuss, hopefully in general terms, the language that DEP has put out there, and try to help Mike and the others that might be helping to draft MRC's comments on this initial language for DEP for our submission. And as I sort of like directed folks going into it, in my mind, the most important thing, I mean, there's a lot of issues with what DEP drafted and has put out there. A lot of very technical and granular type of issues, problems with what they've put out there. But I think what we need to do most importantly is think about it in the broader scope and in the more conceptual terms of, is what they've written going to apply to us and apply to MRC, to the facility in Hamden, and will we be able to help our members benefit from this program with the way that they're talking about it? So that is really our challenge, is to figure out a way, because this legislation has been passed. There's no going back. It's going to happen. We need to make it work for us and make sure it applies to our facility and to our members. So whatever comments we need to provide need to be constructive in explaining how they need to pull in and not exclude significant portions of the state by the way that they're constructing their implementing guidelines. So with that, I know Bob and Aaron and Tony in particular read this pretty carefully and wrote up some really great notes on it. And I know Tony already had his hand up, so I'm going to let Tony go first. But if Aaron or Bob wanted to provide some general thoughts on that, I don't know if anybody else had a chance to look at the DEP language and has any thoughts about it. But we're going to have some pretty big comments we're going to need to make on this to be able to get our point across to DEP about the importance of making sure this is inclusive and not exclusive to our part of the state. So, Tony?
This is the epitome. You summed it up very nicely, Karen, but this is the epitome of the devil's in the details. I'd sat in on all these meetings, all but I think the first one, and I'd read the first handout from DEP about the reimbursement process, and then I read their first part one, and my head was swimming once again. But I think what we need to do is meet with DEP and ask them, does this include MWS? If not, why not?
Well, I mean, part of, I think, the point, Tony, is that if we aren't sure if it includes MWS, we need to figure out what needs to be written in there so we make sure it gets included, because if we're not even sure if it's included, I'm sure lots of other people feel like it's not included. So what I would like to see is like, what do we think needs to be in there to be added or to make sure that it applies to us?
This includes facilities such as MWS. Doesn't eliminate them, because I've had this nervous feeling all through this process at all these meetings, subtle lines about not including facilities like MWS. I don't know if that's old grudges or what, but it's made me nervous right along. Thank you. That's one of the key things. And two, we need to know how to do this. We need how to implement it. You're right. Exactly right.
Mike, and then Aaron.
So I think Aaron, Bob, and Tony did a great job with the comments, and I read through it, and I agree with you, Tony, but I would approach it in a different way, where when we write the comments, as I went through it, I highlighted areas saying, okay, we could fall in here, but we needed a little more detail. Okay, we could fall under this, but we need a little more detail. I'd go into it where, now I'm pretty sure this is where our facility falls in, but could you put MWS in here, or could you clarify a little bit more this, and this? Like, I go back at them and say, this is where we fall in, but it needs to be a little bit polished up, just to make sure we've covered everything, rather than asking them if we fall in. I would point out all the places that, you know, okay, yeah, this is where we fit into this, but you know, you're missing this detail and this detail, just to make sure that everything's covered. It is one way I would approach it. I mean, when I read through this whole document, I think there's several things we could go back at, but I think the first and foremost is just making sure that our members know that if they're commingling or they sign a recycling contract, because remember, we also offer single stream contracts as part of the agreement, that they're covered by sending their stuff to our facility.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the pricing and the rebate structure, or I'm sorry, Tony, and the reimbursement structure, I think those are battles we can fight down the road. But like you said, Karen, first and foremost, we need to know that we fit in there, but I think we need to tell them this is where we fit in, but can you clarify it a little bit more?
Yeah. That's I like the way you did it, Mike, and I'll go back through it with a highlighter and see if I come up with some ideas. I've been told I'm too blunt. You're more diplomatic, so thank you.
Aaron, and then Bob.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of say what Mike was just saying. Instead of saying MWS is included in this, I think having the DEP add statements, or a statement that's similar to, you know, innovative technology, innovative waste sorting technology, you know, is a welcome addition to this, and would be included under contractor, and the final results of the sort are defined, you know what I mean? And then it whatever comes out of the sorting is what becomes that packaging material and falls under the rest of these rules. As I said in my comments, I don't think this is really as bad as it looks. Reading it, it really does look bad. But if you kind of think about it, tracking the work that you do and the amount of effort you put in, how much you use your machinery, honestly, that's pretty good business sense. So I think it's doable. Mike hit it on the head. There's these little places where I think this probably is where we would fit in, but there's really a lack of clarity there. So if we can come up with some language that specifically includes like what we're doing, and not exclude anybody else by saying MWS, but open it up to anybody who has innovative ideas that actually remove packaging material from the waste stream. I think that's the direction we kind of need to go.
Bob, and then Mike.
I agree. One of the issues I have with the document is that it doesn't require any kind of disclosure to the consumer of what packaging materials are being used by the producers, by the entities that buy the packaging materials and send them into the state. I think it would help clarify matters tremendously if consumers knew what packaging materials they would be forced, if you will, to buy and to get rid of. I think that ought to be part of the draft somewhere. And I'm also concerned that it doesn't, as Aaron mentioned, it doesn't address the issue of technology and the repurposing of recycled materials. Introducing technology into the process and repurposing materials that are normally recycled shouldn't be ignored in the document. I think it should be part of the way EPR addresses the issue, and that automatically gets us in the door. If there's any doubt about our being included in this, that would get us in the door, and it wouldn't be an issue anymore. There were some other things I mentioned in the memo I wrote up. I don't need to go into those now, other than the fact that it is a terribly complicated, convoluted, terribly written document. The defined terms aren't properly presented, and there's certainly not defined terms consistently throughout the document maybe it was just done in a rush and they're looking for some feedback. I hope that's what it is. But this does not fly as something even close to what we're going to need to make this thing work. Anyway, my 2 cents.
Mike,
Yeah, I think is just to reiterate on like what Aaron said, I think with our comments, because, maybe they also don't realize, but it's important to work in when we comment back what we provide. We feel we fit in here because, and we're going to be able to have access to all this reporting. They need to realize and be educated that everything with the facility comes through a scale and leaves through a scale. And then we track all those volumes and percentages. So we know that we have 102,000 tons, and we know that we'll say Bangor is, 45% of that. And 10% of that got sorted and recycled, just fictitious numbers, but they need to understand we are going to be an asset to this program for one-stop shopping for the data that they will not have to chase. It's going to be coming from one facility in a lot of cases, and will just have to be merged. What I foresee happening is I bet everything ends up coming to our facility, and then you're still going to have a few facilities once we're up and going that are bailing their own cardboard and sending that. Well, those facilities are going to have to merge their data with ours. But I think as part of the comment process, it's not important to say we fit in here, but it's all say due to what we're going to be able to provide you in these sections.
Tony?
It was just disheartening to me to read it and say, oh, there's us. Oh, there's Eco Maine. Have it obviously presented in some form or fashion, like Aaron said we need to do. And Mike, some of the subtleties, but that's what struck me when I read it.
Sophie?
So I think we need to remember that public policy being made is a little bit like sausage. And I think it is incumbent upon us to come to the table with our expertise and to be positive. But I also want to just be thankful that DEP is taking this on and giving it their best effort and truly being open to stakeholder feedback. I really don't want us to create a narrative in which we don't support our partners at DEP as they go through what is probably a really complex.
I would agree with Sophie. Oh, you froze up there for a second, Sophie. I think we got the gist. So Mike, can you remind us, did you meet with the EPR specific people at DEP and talk about this? Or
Tony and I did in the very beginning stages.
yeah,
And we went through, some of the things that the facility did at that time. We were closed, but we did. And I think we should revisit that meeting. And I'd be happy to set that up. But yes, in the very beginning stages, we did.
yeah, my hope and expectation is that DEP wants and intends for EPR to apply to MRC and its members and the facility. But I was not able to give it a thorough read, but what I did read, did cause me some concern that there could be, other folks that could read it differently. I thought it was very interesting that they didn't define recycling. And perhaps maybe somewhere else it's defined, I don't know, but it seemed like maybe the definition of what a commodity is was what they were using to be the proxy for recycling, in which case that's a little problematic, I think, for the facility. So, in that spirit, I think we need to go in, and sort of offer suggestions for what they might do to expand those definitions, or like you're saying, to make sure it is clear that it covers different ways of removing items from the waste stream. with the end goal being to divert it from landfill, right? I mean, that's the end goal. So if that's what's happening, there should be a way to get credit for that. So any other thoughts, Tony?
Just throughout the process, I brought up the definition thing, that we need a lot of definitions. You could go through there and double their list. And also example lists of readily recyclables and non-readily recyclables, lists of those. And those aren't in there. So and Sophie, wherever she went, she's gone. Yes, we need to present a positive, but we were critiquing this. The easiest thing in the world to do is critique somebody else's writing. But from this, we can come up with positive suggestions and proposals and changes.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought, Aaron, one of your comments about the not really, you know, where do things like organizations like MRC or EcoMaine sort of fall in this, you know, where we're really not a contractor like Casella versus we're not a municipality, we're not in, you know, and whether or not there's a need for defining that in some other way. Like I said, I didn't read it in detail enough to sort of see whether or not there's a need for that exactly, but you're right, we definitely are not the same.
I think that distinction between for-profit, nonprofit, I mean, we're acting for municipalities. Yeah, okay, I think we just said that, quasi-municipal. So yeah, I think there could be some value in having that distinction.
Yeah, Mike?
I mean, one thing I think needs to be considered, and maybe this is off topic, is this an MRC thing that when it comes to the tracking and the reporting, we do it through our MWS facility, or is it a 100% MWS thing that's for everybody, whether it's a non-MRC member or an MRC member? And maybe that's overthinking it a little bit, because we got to make sure the facility's in here and covered it. But that's one of the things that I wrote down.
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think MWS will be required to report on behalf of anybody sending waste there. It's kind of like what PERC does and these other places. I mean, they were the source for information for municipalities to provide their annual reporting and things like that on recycling. So yeah, so I think they would be reporting on no matter whether they're MRC members or not. But I think MRC still nonetheless has a lot it can add in terms of value for EPR administration for members. Tony?
The stewardship organization is like the middleman in this. They're going to be implementing the law and the policies. Do we wait to see the RFP before we do any work on that? Are we probably not involved in the selection? But I think we want to watch that quite closely. Go down through the RFP DEP is going to put out and see just what their criteria are, and be prepared at some point when we see it to comment on that as well.
It'll be interesting to see who steps up
Yes.
for that. I mean, I'm thinking it's going to be NRCM, but maybe not. Maybe that
Good
doesn't
point.
stick with them enough, but
Good
a
point.
subsidiary. Bob?
I am concerned about the SO and how they're compensated. I'd love to see the RFP, Tony. I know there was conversation about the MRC maybe putting its hat in the ring to be chosen as an SO. And if that is done separate from MWS, maybe the conflict I perceive will disappear. And maybe that's worth looking at. But I think Mike's raising an important question about whether it's MRC or MWS. And I agree with you, Karen. I think it ought to be MWS because they control the stream. And I'm also concerned about how granular they're going to become when they start just finding the categories of what they call recyclables. And again, it goes back to my point about distinguishing between recyclables and repurposed materials. And do repurposed materials have a role to play in this? I would think they would have a very important role to play in reducing what goes into landfills, and therefore ought to be compensatable. But
If
a lot of
repurposing
questions.
is reuse, that's the top of the heap. And we had talked about this at one meeting. Maybe that hierarchy needs to be shuffled around
Yep.
or changed. They've skipped the top step, the top option.
Yep.
All right. Any other thoughts or comments on this? I guess we'll, Mike, maybe you can sort of take a first stab at a draft of pulling some of this stuff together, and then we can react and add to that. I mean, Mike and Aaron and sorry, Bob and Tony did a great job of providing that base, I think, for some good feedback.
So, oh, go ahead, Tony, I'm sorry.
Oh, just a quick one. I'm assuming we're privy to the RFP when it gets published. It's a public document, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of think they're a long way from that, but it's not really clear. I wish they would have a nice big outline template or something of the schedule, but it's very confusing. Like, I'm not quite sure what scope of what this language is that's here now in front of us is intended to cover, and what's still to come. Like, what are the other chunks that are going to be covered in these other things that were supposedly supposed to be out, in the next couple of weeks. So
earlier this year, they did have a timeline shown.
Mhm.
I'll see if I can find it. It's broad, but they did have one.
I'm also expecting or hoping that once these initial drafts have been responded to and commented on, that they're going to put it all together in one over implementing guidelines that will go out for yet another round of review, so you can see it in its entirety. Because I think, like Bob was making a lot of points that I think are probably going to be addressed in later things, but you don't know. You hope they're going to be addressed, but we want to make sure we're getting covered. But yeah, I think Tony's idea of possibly another meeting with DEP might be important at some point, if we feel like that it's not covering us sufficiently. So, but we'll see that. We'll go in these comments, do these comments first, and see what the next section comes out looking like, and go from there.
So, Karen, if it's okay with you, because the 13th is right around the corner and the schedule's getting a little crazy. So what I'd like to do is get a draft together, then circulate it between the Tony, Bob, and Aaron to get a complete draft, then circulate it to the board.
That sounds good.
We're going to focus on a few hot topics, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah.
So if that's okay, because it's just a couple weeks away, and we got a lot on our plate before that. So.
That's why I'm hoping they're going to give us another bite at the apple down the road as well, because it's a lot to process and comment on in a short period of time. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, we're right
Karen,
at 3 o'clock. Yes.
Sorry, we do have one question in the Q&A.
I did see that, and Jackie, since we're at time and it's not exactly relevant to the conversation we just had, I'm going to have Mike get back to you by email with answers to those questions. So hopefully that will be satisfactory. So get out of here right at an hour. Appreciate that. Anything else from anybody? All right. Well, maybe some of you will get to see the MRC booth at the MMA convention. I think it's next week. And if not, we'll see all of you at the board meeting on the 11th. All right. Thank you all for your time. I've entertained a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
All right.
Move adjourn.
We'll consider it a vote and a move. Move it and a vote. Thank you. All right. Have a good
Bye.
afternoon, everybody.
You
Bye.
too.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.